come close, Keeper of Peace. For tonight, I must speak with the voice of ages long forgotten. Can you feel it in the air? That sense of vast time stretching behind us, of civilizations that rose and fell before the current world even knew its own name. Tonight, you sit beside one who has walked through the shadows of what once was. The chronicle I share tonight unfolds in quiet chambers, where the most ancient wisdom is preserved, where a scholar, seeking truth, encounters one whose memory spans millennia. It is a tale not of adventure, but of revelation, of learning that the world was not always as it is now, that cooperation once created marvels beyond imagining, and that the seeds of such wonders may yet lie dormant, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. So, open your mind to the possibilities beyond the present moment, friend, as I share the ancient secrets of the Forgotten Realms. The candlelight flickered gently in the evening breeze that drifted through the open window of the scholars' quarters at the monastery of Oghma in Waterdeep. Sister Therai had spent most of her adult life studying the ancient history of Faerun, but tonight, she found herself in the company of someone whose knowledge went far deeper than anything contained in books or scrolls. Elminster Aumar sat comfortably in the room's most substantial chair, his long white beard flowing over robes that had seen centuries of adventure and study. The ancient wizard's presence filled the chamber with an almost tangible sense of accumulated wisdom, as if the very air around him had been saturated with stories and secrets from ages long past.
You wanted to know about the time before the Dragon Queen's first banishment,
Elminster said, his voice carrying the distinctive accent that marked him as someone who had lived through more history than most civilizations could claim.
Most folk today think that evil dragons have always been enemies of the good peoples of the world. But that wasn't always so. There was a time, long ago, when dragons of all colors worked together with the younger races to build wonders that would make today's greatest cities seem like children's toys.
Sister Therai leaned forward eagerly, her quill poised over parchment as she prepared to record whatever wisdom the Sage of Shadowdale might share. As a scholar of ancient history, she had always been frustrated by the gaps in historical record. Entire millennia that seemed to have been deliberately obscured or forgotten, leaving only fragments and hints of the great events that had shaped the world. "Tell me about the Age of Cooperation," she requested. "The old texts mention it, but the details are so sparse that most scholars believe it to be mythical." Elminster's eyes twinkled with the particular satisfaction of someone who possessed knowledge that others can only dream of.
Oh, it was real enough, lass. I've walked through the ruins of cities that were built by human hands and dragon magic, working in harmony. I've seen artifacts that could only have been created through the marriage of mortal ingenuity and draconic power. And I've spoken with dragons old enough to remember those days. Though, most prefer not to discuss them.
He gestured toward the window, where the lights of Waterdeep sparkled like earthbound stars in the gathering darkness.
Imagine this city, but built not just with stone and mortar, but with living magic woven into every structure. Buildings that could reshape themselves according to need. Bridges that spanned impossible distances without any visible support. Towers that reached toward the heavens with their foundations extended deep into the earth to tap the planet's own magical energies.
"That sounds like pure fantasy," Sister Therai said, though her tone suggested she desperately wanted to believe.
Aye, it does sound that way from our current perspective,
Elminster agreed. But you have to understand that magic worked differently in those days. The barriers between the material plane and the other realms of existence were thinner, more permeable. A skilled practitioner could draw upon energies that are barely accessible today, and dragons, who are naturally attuned to such forces, could channel powers that would seem godlike by modern standards. The ancient wizard stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the night sky as if he could see through the present to witness scenes from ages past.
The greatest of these cooperative endeavors was the city of Dracorium. Built where the Sword Mountains now stand, it was home to nearly 1 million souls, Humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, and dragons living side by side in perfect harmony.
1 million people? Sister Therai's voice showed her astonishment. That would have been larger than any city that exists today.
Larger and more beautiful. The city was laid out in 7 concentric circles, each one representing a different aspect of civilized life. The outermost circle was devoted to agriculture and crafts, with farms that used dragon magic to ensure perfect harvests, and workshops where artisans created items of incredible beauty and utility.
Elminster's voice took on the cadence of someone recounting a beloved story, his words painting vivid pictures of wonders that had been lost to time.
The second circle contained the schools and libraries, where human curiosity combined with draconic wisdom to push the boundaries of knowledge. Imagine academies, where students could learn not just from books and teachers, but from dragons who had personally witnessed the events they were studying.
What kind of things did they learn?
Everything, the wizard replied simply. The movements of the stars and planets, the secret languages of plants and animals, the deep magics that govern weather and season, the mysteries of life and death themselves. But more than that, they learned how to work together despite their differences, how to turn diversity into strength rather than a source of conflict.
He returned to his chair, settling back with the comfortable ease of someone who had perfected the art of storytelling over many centuries.
The third circle was devoted to governance and law, where elected councils that included both dragons and younger races worked together to solve the complex problems of managing such a diverse population. They developed legal codes that protected the rights of all thinking beings, regardless of their species or magical abilities.
Elected councils that included dragons? Sister Therai's academic training made her immediately grasp the implications. But dragons are naturally solitary and territorial. How did they adapt to collective decision-making?
It wasn't easy, Elminster admitted. There were plenty of conflicts and misunderstandings, especially in the early years. But they learned that the wisdom of the group often exceeded the wisdom of any individual, no matter how ancient or powerful. The dragons who participated in these councils often said it was the most challenging and rewarding work they had ever undertaken.
The 4th and 5th circles, according to Elminster's account, had been devoted to the arts of trade, respectively. The artistic achievements of Dracorium had been legendary even in their own time. Sculptures that seemed to move with life of their own, paintings that showed different scenes depending on the viewer's mood, musical compositions that incorporated the natural songs of wind and water into harmonies that could heal both body and spirit.
And the trade?
Sister Therai asked, her scholarly mind immediately curious about the practical aspects of managing such a complex society.
Dracorium was the center of a trading network that spanned the known world and beyond. Dragon riders would carry goods and messages across vast distances in a matter of days, while magical communication systems allowed merchants to coordinate activities across multiple continents. They established trade relationships with peoples that most civilizations of that time didn't even know existed.
The 6th circle had been devoted to what Elminster called the mysteries, temples and sacred spaces where the spiritual traditions of all the participating races had been studied. Rather than trying to create a single unified religion, the people of Dracorium had embraced the idea that different peoples might have different but equally valid relationships with the divine.
They believed that the gods themselves were enriched by being worshipped in different ways by different peoples, the wizard explained. A dwarf's relationship with Moradin and a dragon's relationship with Bahamut might seem completely different on the surface, but both were seeking connection with forces greater than themselves. The temples of Dracorium were designed to accommodate and celebrate that diversity.
And the innermost circle? Elminster's expression grew more serious.
That was reserved for the greatest collaboration of all, the Eternal Library. It was part building, part magical construct, part living entity. Every piece of knowledge discovered anywhere in the network of allied cities was shared with that library, where it was preserved not just in books and scrolls, but in crystalline matrices that could store memories, experiences, even dreams.
He paused, as if considering how much detail to share about something so far beyond the normal human experience.
Scholars who gained access to the Eternal Library could literally experience historical events through the memories of those who had witnessed them.
They could feel what it was like to soar through the clouds on dragon wings, to see the world through elven eyes that perceived patterns invisible to humans, to sense the deep earth currents that dwarves used to navigate underground. What happened to it all? Sister Therai asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer.
War,
Elminster said simply.
not the quick, brutal conflicts that most people think of, but a slow, grinding struggle that lasted for generations and destroyed everything that had been built. It began with fear, neighboring human kingdoms that saw the cooperation between dragons and mortals as a threat to their own power.
The details of the conflict, as Elminster recounted them, were both fascinating and heartbreaking. Political manipulation, economic warfare, propaganda campaigns designed to turn different groups against each other, sabotage operations that destroyed crucial infrastructure, and finally, open military conflict that left the great cooperative cities in ruins.
The tragedy wasn't just the destruction of the physical structures,
the wizard continued.
It was a loss of trust between the races. Dragons retreated to their hordes and their solitary lairs, convinced that cooperation with the younger races was impossible. Humans, elves, and the others developed myths and legends that portrayed dragons as inherently evil creatures who could never be trusted.
But surely some knowledge survived? Sister Therai's voice carried a note of desperate hope.
Fragments, scattered pieces, hints, and rumors. Some of the magical techniques developed during the Age of Cooperation were passed down through secret traditions. Some of the architectural principles we've preserved in the designs of later buildings. And some dragons who participated in the Great Experiment retained their belief that cooperation was possible, though they rarely spoke of it openly.
Elminster stood again and walked to a shelf lined with ancient tomes, selecting one whose binding was so old that its original color was impossible to determine.
This contains some of the few surviving accounts of the Eternal Library's contents, he said,
handing the book to Sister Therai with obvious care.
Most of it is written in languages that no longer exist, but there are enough fragments in common to give you a sense of what was lost.
The scholar opened the book carefully, her eyes widening as she scanned pages filled with diagrams and descriptions that challenged everything she thought she knew about the limits of magical possibility. Here were designs for healing chambers that could restore both physical injury and emotional trauma, communication networks that could connect minds across vast distances, transportation systems that could move people and goods through dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. This is incredible, she breathed. If even a fraction of these techniques could be recovered and adapted for modern use.
Aye, but that's the challenge, isn't it?
Elminster returned to his chair, settling back with the patient expression of someone who had spent lifetimes considering such possibilities.
The knowledge exists, but the social structures that made it possible are gone. These techniques weren't just matters of magical theory. They required levels of trust and cooperation that simply don't exist in today's world.
Could they be rebuilt? Could we create new cooperative cities like Dracorium?
Perhaps, given enough time and the right circumstances, but it would require fundamental changes in how different peoples think about each other. Humans would have to accept that dragons are not inherently evil, just different. Dragons would have to accept that working with shorter-lived races requires patience and compromise. And all the peoples of the world would have to learn to see diversity as a strength rather than a threat.
Sister Therai found herself thinking about the current political situation, with tensions rising between various kingdoms and the constant threat of war hanging over trade routes and diplomatic relationships. The idea of the kind of cooperation that Elminster was describing seemed almost impossibly utopian. You don't sound very optimistic about the chances of such changes occurring, she observed.
I'm cautiously hopeful, the wizard replied. I've lived long enough to see cycles of cooperation and conflict play out many times. Right now, we're in a phase where fear and suspicion dominate, but such phases don't last forever. There are always individuals and small groups who remember that things can be different, who work to preserve the knowledge and wisdom that will be needed when the next age of cooperation begins.
He gestured toward the book that still lay open in Sister Therai's lap.
That's why places like this monastery are so important, and why scholars like yourself are doing essential work. You're keeping alive the memory of what was possible, maintaining the knowledge that will be needed when the world is ready for it again.
How will we know when that time comes?
You'll know because people will start asking the right questions. Instead of, how can we defeat our enemies? They'll ask, how can we work with others to solve common problems? Instead of, how can we gain power over others? They'll ask, how can we use our abilities to benefit everyone? And instead of, how can we protect ourselves from change? They'll ask, how can we adapt and grow together?
As Sister Therai closed the ancient tome and prepared to return it to its place of honor, she found herself filled with a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. The world might currently be dominated by fear and conflict, but it hadn't always been that way, and it didn't have to remain that way forever. "Thank you, Master Elminster," she said. "This knowledge, it changes everything. It gives context to all the fragmentary references I've found in other sources, and it suggests possibilities that I never would have imagined."
"Use it wisely, lass,"
the wizard replied as he prepared to leave.
"Share it with others who have open minds and good hearts. Plant the seeds of understanding wherever you can, and trust that someday they'll grow into something beautiful."
As the ancient mage disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a faint scent of pipe smoke and the lingering sense of vast knowledge shared, Sister Therai sat quietly in her chamber, her mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow, she would begin the careful work of incorporating this new understanding into her ongoing research, documenting and preserving it for future scholars who might one day help her usher in a new age of cooperation. Outside her window, the lights of Waterdeep continued to twinkle in the darkness, each one representing lives and dreams and hopes for the future. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine that future as something bright and wonderful, filled with possibilities that most people had forgotten were even possible. The ancient secrets of the Forgotten Realms were not just tales of what had been lost, but promises of what might yet be regained. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair, I have countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please, light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently, and ring that notification bell. That way, you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it, wouldn't you agree? Now, if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them that adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery. Each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventures be worthy of legend. And may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.